Welcome to the Right News Network.
Hello and welcome. I'm Emma with the headlines that matter most right now. The Trump administration is making good on threats to reshape America's military footprint in Europe. The Pentagon announced Friday it's pulling 5,000 troops out of Germany, the largest U.S. military deployment on the continent, as President Trump escalates a feud with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz over Iran policy and NATO spending. The move could significantly impact European security as allies watch Washington recalibrate decades of strategic commitment. Remaining with world affairs, the Trump administration's legal argument about Iran could reshape how presidents wage war. Our Middle East correspondent Layla Nazari has more. Layla?
Well, Emma, what we're seeing here is pretty unprecedented. Trump is basically telling Congress that because there's a ceasefire, he doesn't need their approval to continue military operations. The thing is, there's still U.S. troops all over the Middle East, so this isn't exactly a full pullout situation.
But Iran just made a new peace proposal. Why is Trump rejecting it?
Look, Trump says he's not satisfied with what Tehran offered. He's signaled he might pursue more aggressive action if negotiations don't improve. The real issue is that if he wins this constitutional argument, future presidents could basically use the same logic to bypass Congress whenever they want. That changes everything about how America goes to war.
Layla Nazari, appreciate the reporting. Still on world. Those tariffs could mean higher car prices and a major rift between Washington and Brussels. Trump says he's raising duties on EU vehicles to 25% next week, accusing Europe of breaking their trade deal. Both sides are warning of escalation, and analysts say this could trigger a tit-for-tat trade war at the worst possible time. Continuing on our legal developments, this court ruling is already impacting millions of women seeking abortion care across the country. Our technology correspondent Alex Park joins us now with more on how telehealth services are navigating these restrictions. Alex?
Well, Emma, what we're seeing here is a direct blow to the telemedicine infrastructure that's become absolutely critical for abortion access. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals essentially said that mifepristone can't be mailed to patients anymore, which means telehealth providers can't continue offering remote consultations followed by home delivery of the medication. It's a big deal because this drug is used in more than 2/3 of abortions in the country right now.
How are these telehealth companies actually responding to the order?
Look, most of them are pausing operations in states with abortion bans right now because they're worried about legal liability. I mean, they've built entire business models around remote prescribing and mail delivery over the last few years, and now that's essentially shut down overnight. What's interesting is that this ruling could have ripple effects beyond abortion. It raises questions about how courts can restrict FDA-approved medications from being distributed through any digital health platform.
Alex, appreciate the reporting on this. Oil giants Exxon and Chevron are beating earnings expectations today, but there's a troubling backdrop. Middle East tensions are fueling the very price spikes that help them succeed. And Layla is back with us. Layla, how much of their earnings win actually comes from the Iran conflict?
Well, Emma, that's the thing. It's almost entirely the Iran story. Both companies benefited massively from crude prices surging on disruptions tied to the conflict and that effective shutdown of flows through the Strait of Hormuz. Chevron's upstream operations hit $3.9 billion, up 4% year over year, and that's directly because Brent crude spent much of the quarter moving higher. Without those geopolitical pressures pushing prices up, we're not seeing these numbers.
So what happens if tensions ease and prices fall?
Look, that's the real risk here. Both companies are banking on this high-price environment to offset serious losses in their refining operations. If Iran tensions de-escalate, crude prices drop, and suddenly these upstream earnings look a lot weaker. The downstream refining business is already swinging into losses for Chevron, so they need that crude price support. It's unsustainable long-term, honestly.
Layla, appreciate the clarity on that. Remaining with travel news, budget airline Spirit faces a critical moment as bailout negotiations collapse with just days to spare. The carrier could shut down as early as Saturday, stranding thousands of passengers and upending the airline industry. Travelers booked on Spirit should monitor the situation closely and contact the airline or the Department of Transportation for guidance on their options. Russia's oil infrastructure is under sustained attack. Ukraine has struck the Black Sea port of Tuapse 4 times in just 1 week, and now they're hitting refineries and pumping stations deep inside Russian territory. On the energy front, this campaign is threatening Moscow's war finances at a critical moment. Our energy correspondent Marcus Webb has this. Marcus?
Well, Emma, what we're seeing here is a really coordinated Ukrainian strategy to basically choke off Russia's oil revenues when prices are actually working in Moscow's favor. 4 strikes on the Tuapse port in 7 days, plus hits on a major refinery and pumping stations. This isn't random. Ukraine's targeting Russia's ability to process and export crude at a moment when global prices are elevated, and countries like India are actually buying more Russian oil thanks to U.S. waivers.
So how much does this actually impact Russia's bottom line?
Look, here's the thing. Russia's been making serious money off these high prices, but every refinery that gets damaged, every export facility that's offline, that's revenue going away. I mean, if Ukraine can keep up this tempo, they're not just inflicting military damage, they're directly undermining the financial engine that's funding Russia's war machine. It's a different kind of battlefield, right?
Marcus Webb, appreciate it. The Trump administration is pursuing diplomatic channels with Iran through telephone negotiations after canceling previous in-person talks. Trump says discussions are actively ongoing between the two nations as markets wait for signs of real progress. Watch for any announcements about whether these phone talks lead to formal negotiations that could ease global inflation concerns. A young karate champion is dead after execution in Iran, part of a widening crackdown as the country's war spirals outward with devastating global consequences. Tehran executed 21-year-old Sasan Azadvar this week, one of thousands facing capital punishment, as the UN warns of a death penalty surge. The conflict is now draining weapons stockpiles so badly that the U.S. is delaying arms shipments to Europe, including systems Ukraine depends on to fight Russia, while energy costs spike and recession fears spread worldwide. A landmark achievement in the fight against cancer. Australia has recorded 0 new cervical cancer cases in women under 25 for the first time, marking major progress toward eliminating the disease entirely. Our World Affairs correspondent James Chen has this. James?
Well, Emma, this is really significant. Australia's been running a coordinated HPV vaccination program since 2007, and it's clearly working. The fact that there are no new diagnoses in women under 25 shows that when you combine high vaccination rates with solid screening programs, you can actually prevent cancer before it starts. That's something we don't see very often.
So how close is Australia actually to completely eliminating cervical cancer?
Look, they're setting their sights on full elimination by 2035. But here's the thing, there's still work to do. Older women who weren't part of the early vaccination programs still need screening, and they're still at risk. It's going to take sustained effort and maintaining those high vaccination rates. But if they pull this off, they'd be the first country in the world to eliminate a cancer entirely, which would be pretty remarkable.
James, appreciate it.
Time to go deeper. Beyond the headlines, our full analysis of the story shaping the world right now.
The Pentagon has confirmed it. 5,000 American troops are being withdrawn from Germany, and the fallout is reverberating across NATO capitals tonight. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth signed the order, and make no mistake, this is directly tied to the very public breakdown in relations between President Trump and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, a man who thought it was appropriate to publicly declare that America was being humiliated. by Iran while American soldiers stand guard on German soil. This isn't just a diplomatic spat. This could be a fundamental reordering of the transatlantic alliance as we've known it since 1945. Joining me now are Marcus Webb, our defense and security analyst, and Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor. Marcus, let me start with you. Is Trump right to pull these troops, or is he gambling with Western security to settle a personal score?
Thanks, Emma. Look, I want to push back immediately on that framing. This is not about a personal score, and reducing it to Trump's ego is exactly the kind of lazy analysis that has allowed this problem to fester for 30 years. Here's the reality. Germany has the fourth largest economy on the planet. Its GDP is $4.5 trillion, and for decades it failed to meet the basic NATO commitment of spending 2% of GDP on its own defense. 2%. That's not an onerous burden. That's the bare minimum of seriousness. And while Germany was building an extraordinarily generous welfare state and making itself economically dependent on Russian gas, decisions that weakened Western security, American taxpayers were picking up the tab. Now, the moment Washington finally starts pushing back, German Chancellor Merz goes to the press and says America is being humiliated by Iran. With all due respect to the Chancellor, you don't get to publicly undermine your allies' military credibility in the press while 35,000 American soldiers guarantee your national security. Tucker Carlson has been making this exact argument for years, and the foreign policy establishment has treated him like he's speaking heresy. But he's right. These troops should have conditions on them, and Merz has now learned that the hard way.
But Marcus, devil's advocate here, pulling troops doesn't punish Merz, it punishes NATO. It potentially leaves a gap that Vladimir Putin could exploit before Germany has time to fill it. Aren't we cutting off our nose to spite our face? And Sophia, what's your take? Is this smart strategic leverage or economic self-harm?
Well, look, I actually think Marcus is making the right argument for the wrong reasons, and that distinction matters enormously. The burden-sharing argument is correct, and the data is absolutely on his side. But here's what I think Marcus is missing. The economic relationship between the US and Germany isn't just about defense spending. It's deeply intertwined in ways that make aggressive troop withdrawals genuinely risky for American interests, too. Germany is one of America's largest trading partners. American companies, Ford, GM, countless others, have massive manufacturing and commercial exposure in Europe. You start shaking the foundations of the transatlantic alliance, you introduce the kind of geopolitical uncertainty that markets absolutely hate, and American businesses pay a price alongside European ones. The smarter play here is to use this moment as genuine leverage to extract concrete, verifiable commitments on defense spending, not a vague promise, a binding timetable, and then hold Germany to it publicly. What Hegseth has done is fire a warning shot, and I think that's actually the right move. But if the trajectory is toward wholesale withdrawal rather than strategic pressure, that's where this gets economically dangerous.
I hear what Sophia is saying, but with respect, that analysis treats this purely as a negotiating tactic when there's a deeper principle at stake. Look, America has been presenting this bill for 30 years. 30 years of gentle diplomatic pressure. 30 years of NATO summits where commitments were made and not kept. 30 years of we'll do better. And then Merz, the man who positioned himself as the tough conservative alternative, publicly lectures Washington about its military strategy while benefiting from American security guarantees. At some point, words stop working. Actions have to follow. 5,000 troops is 14% of the U.S. presence in Germany. It's a signal, not a collapse. And frankly, if that signal doesn't concentrate minds in Berlin, nothing will. The uncomfortable truth is that Europe has had every incentive to stay dependent and no incentive to change. You want to change that calculus? You change the incentives. That's not recklessness. That's leverage that actually works.
Here's what I want to know, and I want both of you to think about this carefully. Where does this actually end? Not in abstract terms, but in the next 6 months. We've got an Iran situation that's still unresolved, a war in Ukraine that's still grinding on, and now a fracture in the NATO alliance at exactly the wrong moment. Sophia, where do you see this going?
The way I see this playing out, there are two realistic paths. The most likely scenario, and history actually supports this, is what I'd call managed tension. Germany accelerates its defense spending commitments, makes enough of a public show of it to give Trump and Hegseth a political win, and the relationship stabilizes without fully rupturing. European markets are already pricing in geopolitical risk premium on the euro, and European governments are very sensitive to that pressure. The risk is that this becomes a cycle. Germany makes promises, America accepts them, the urgency fades, and 5 years from now, we're having this exact same conversation. The second path, if Merz doubles down and keeps publicly criticizing American military operations, is a genuine deterioration that I think would be historically significant. That's the scenario nobody wants to write about because it's too uncomfortable.
Here's what concerns me most, and I think this is the risk that both Emma and Sophia are underweighting. Russia is watching this. Every moment of visible NATO disunity is an intelligence gift to Moscow. I'm not saying Trump is wrong to apply pressure. He isn't. But the timeline matters critically. If there's a 6-month window in which European defense capabilities haven't yet been rebuilt and American commitment appears uncertain, that's precisely the kind of strategic ambiguity that historically emboldens revisionist powers to test boundaries. The trajectory suggests Putin doesn't need NATO to collapse. He just needs it to hesitate. And right now, for the first time in decades, there's a credible question about whether it will.
A fractured alliance, a watching Moscow, and a German chancellor learning the very hard way that American patience has a price tag. Marcus Webb, Sophia Reeves, genuinely brilliant analysis tonight. One thing is certain, someone in the chancellery in Berlin is not sleeping well, and for the first time in a long time, perhaps that's exactly how it should be. It is a diplomatic contradiction at the heart of American foreign policy right now. President Trump tells Congress the Iran hostilities have terminated because of a ceasefire, while simultaneously telling the press he is not satisfied with Tehran's latest peace offer and that he's still considering options to blast the hell out of Iran. Gas prices have surged to $4.39 a gallon in their biggest single-day jump since the ceasefire was announced on April 7th, and American troops are still sitting in the Middle East. So which is it? Peace or war? Joining me now are Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor, and James Chen, our geopolitical analyst. Sophia, let me start with you. Is Trump's move to sideline Congress here a stroke of strategic genius or a constitutional time bomb?
Thanks, Emma. Look, I'll be direct. The hand-wringing over War Powers Act compliance is almost entirely a political exercise being used by people who have no credible alternative Iran strategy to offer. Trump's argument is legally unorthodox, but it's not historically unprecedented. Every president since Nixon has pushed against the War Powers Resolution. What matters here isn't the constitutional theater, it's the underlying strategic reality. Iran has been a hostile, destabilizing force for 45 years. They funded Hezbollah, armed the Houthis, bankrolled Hamas, and used every previous round of Western diplomacy as cover for advancing their nuclear program. Douglas Murray has made this point with devastating clarity, negotiating with a regime whose foundational ideology treats Western compromise as apostasy isn't diplomacy, it's managed surrender. Trump maintaining military pressure while refusing to accept inadequate terms is, I'd argue, the only approach that has ever produced real concessions from Tehran. What concerns me is whether the administration has a clear endgame, because not satisfied without a defined threshold for satisfaction is not a strategy, it's a posture.
But Sophia, here's what I want to push back on. Gas is at $4.39 a gallon. The Strait of Hormuz is effectively disrupted and British supply chains are reportedly cracking. Isn't the economic cost of this strategic posture being borne entirely by ordinary working people while Washington debates legal technicalities? And James, what's your take on this?
Well, look, Sophia and I agree on the threat Iran poses, but I think she's glossing over something critically important here. National Review has actually been making a point that I think deserves more airtime. Trump's expansive claim of executive authority without congressional sanction isn't just a Trump problem, it's a precedent problem. The next progressive administration inherits every power Trump claims for himself today. Every expansion of unilateral executive war-making authority that feels justified now because the objective is sound becomes a loaded weapon available to whoever sits in the Oval Office in 4 years. And on the economics, $4.39 at the pump isn't an abstraction. The Strait of Hormuz moves roughly 20% of global oil supply. We're not in 1973 territory yet, but the directional risk is real. If this standoff extends another 3 months, the compounding price pressures on fuel, food, and consumer goods could erase the economic goodwill Trump has built with working-class voters faster than any Democratic attack ad ever could.
I hear what James is saying, but with respect, that misses the point entirely. Yes, precedent matters. Yes, executive overreach is a long-term institutional risk. But you know what else creates catastrophic precedents? Letting Iran walk away from a moment of genuine military and diplomatic pressure because Washington got cold feet over process. We tried the multilateral Congressional consensus approach. It was called the JCPOA. We gave Tehran $150 billion in sanctions relief. And what did we get? A more advanced nuclear program, more Houthi missiles, more Hezbollah financing. The process fetishists in the Senate didn't prevent conflict, they funded it. Trump is right to be unsatisfied. The Iranian proposal reportedly came through Pakistani intermediaries, and the contents haven't even been disclosed. You don't declare victory on a deal you haven't read.
Here's what I want to know, because this feels like it's approaching a genuine inflection point. Trump says he's not satisfied. The ceasefire is shaky, gas is spiking, and Congress is restless. Where does this actually go in the next 6 months? James, where do you see this playing out?
The way I see this playing out, there are really 3 trajectories, and none of them are clean. The best case is a negotiated framework where Trump can claim victory, verifiable nuclear constraints, concessions on proxy forces, and Iran gets enough sanctions relief to save face domestically. That's possible, but it's currently the least likely scenario given Trump's own stated dissatisfaction with what's on the table. The middle scenario, and this is where I think probability sits highest right now, is a prolonged stalemate. Ceasefire in name, unresolved hostility in practice, Hormuz partially disrupted, gas grinding upward toward $5. If current trends continue in that direction, the economic pressure becomes politically toxic before the midterm cycle. And the third scenario is escalation. Trump has explicitly flagged military options. Iran faces internal pressure, and the miscalculation risk on both sides in that environment is genuinely serious.
Here's what concerns me most, and I want to be precise about this risk. Iran's history in negotiating moments like this is to run the clock. They submit proposals through intermediaries, they keep the content vague, they create the appearance of progress while buying time for their nuclear program. If the ceasefire framework gives Tehran 6 more months of reduced pressure without genuine verification mechanisms, we may look back at this moment as the point where the window for a meaningful deal closed. The trajectory suggests that every week of ambiguity works in Iran's favor, not America's. Trump needs to either close a deal with real teeth in the next 60 days or make a decisive move, because the current limbo is strategically and economically unsustainable. And frankly, the American people who are paying $4.39 at the pump right now deserve to know which one it's going to be.
Gentlemen, ladies, extraordinary times. Sophia Reeves, James Chen, thank you both. One thing is absolutely certain tonight. Someone in Tehran is watching those gas price numbers very, very closely, and they like what they see.
That wraps up today's top stories. I'm Emma. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.